Hey, good afternoon. So my one D&D group that's learning um, D&D for the first time for the most part is probably finishing up their campaign. Well, they are. So one thing I wanted to do was I wanted to review the different classes that are out there, right? Because being new to D&D, when the time came to have them make a character, I just kind of handed them a sheet and said, um, yeah, you can be this person, right? I mean, I kind of gave them a few choices at a very high level, um, give them idea what they were getting into, right? But I wanted to take a moment to revisit that because, like I said, their campaign is ending. Um, we might come back to D&D. I mean, maybe they want to play another round, right? Maybe they want to do other board games, which I'm fine with, right? Especially before we go back into some sort of lockdown at some point. Um, but I wanted to, like I said, um, more food for thought for when, if and when we go back to D&D. Um, if they want to choose a new character, give them some more background and some more ideas on what the different characters do, right? So it's really kind of a hard thing to do in 5e. There's a lot of wiggle room with these classes. So before I start, somebody's going to see this video who knows D&D and is going to say you're wrong. And I might say you're right that I'm wrong, right? I'm trying to really look at this from a 20,000 foot level. I really am. It's because back when I used to play version 1 of D&D, right, 1e, the classes were very rigid, right? There was some multi-classing you could do, which for folks who don't know, it means you can actually have a character play more than one class. You could do 2 levels of thief and 2 levels of monk and be a fourth level character, but be a second level. I said thief, it shows my age. Be a second level rogue and a second level monk. And then you don't have to be strictly in one class. So what I wanted so back in 1E, back in the first version of D&D, your roles were pretty set. There was not much you could do. If you were a fighter, dude, you were a fighter. You did not have much thing to kind of flexibility to really get you to do something else or be kind of a mix, right? Today's D&D 5e, that's not the case. There's a lot of classes that have archetypes, subclasses, whatever you want to call them, right? That allows flexibility for your character. Between that and multiclassing, you can make your character do a whole kinds of crazy stuff, right? You could very easily have, like if I take a look at these different levels, I have one here for cleric is kind of in the middle, and I say he's a support character. I can see a bunch of people saying, no, 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 you can make him, and he can be a frontline character. And you're right. I actually have a cleric that is a bit more of a frontline character. There's definitely ways to build your character in today's D&D that allows movement up and down this chart. But try and keep in mind I'm looking at this from the 20,000 foot view, you know, and like I said, there's some play here. All right, with that being said, so I try to take the classes and put them roughly into 4 categories, with a couple classes being kind of in the middle of those categories. And those categories are frontline, so you're a person who's right at the front of the battle. Um, Support, which means what it sounds like you can be in the front and you are also supporting other characters who are probably in the front, right? But you can both survive on that front line and also you can help other people survive on that front line or help the rest of the group survive. Right? You're buffing characters, so giving them bonuses, that kind of thing, as well as fighting in the front. You have utility, which is different in the sense of um, they're kind of a cleanup character, right? Or a character that does other things that other characters can't do well, right? So kind of hard to explain, you know, like if you look at a cleric or a druid, they can live on that front line and also be a support character. A, Someone like a rogue or a bard probably doesn't want to be on that front line. They're back a little bit further than the support character is and can do things to kind of round out that group to help with things that are either not so much combat based or maybe they're buffing characters or what have you. Um, so a little bit different flavor, right? And it's kind of drawing a bit of a fine line, but there is some differences if you think about it between for people who've played D&D between these two groups. Generally speaking, bards and rogues generally are not up there doing, higher up on this list where you're doing frontline. And yeah, you're doing some support for sure. You can do it, right? Again, like I said, there's always wiggle room between these two, but they definitely want to stay a little bit further back. And then you have the cannons. So these are folks that are like really, really powerful characters, but they're easy to kill, right? So just kind of thinking through this list for a second and kind of going through the groups, and you will see what I mean. So if I take a look at the red group, the frontline groups, right? You basically have your barbarians, your fighters, and your paladins. Barbarians get a D12 worth of hit points, so they get a boatload of hit points, and they have things that allows them to reduce the amount of damage they take with rage. But basically, they get the most hit points of any other character in D&D. So it's not hard to figure out why they're up there towards in the front of combat, getting in the midst of things. Fighter gets a D10 of hit points. They are the masters of combat. They can pick up any weapon, know how to use it, and are effective with it. Paladins, again, there's someone else who's also a fighter type person, right? A frontline person, and also D10 of hit points. They are holy warrior, so you can see there's still I still class him as a frontline type, but he gets some spells. You're starting to move down on that list a bit. He has some abilities that the fighter and the barbarian don't have. The fighter and barbarian are pure up front. Paladin, it starts to gray the line. They are still 90%, 85% front line, but they start to blur the line a little bit with some of their abilities towards a smidgen of support. You start to get in some gray areas now where you're kind of a mix between front and support. And some of this, description, like I said, it's a little vague. But if you take a look at Monk, it's the next one on the list. So Monk only gets a D8 of hit points. So he gets less hit points than other frontline fighters. And as such, you don't want him most of the time directly in front, right? He's someone who's quick, can do quick hits. He can do some level of things that helps other characters, right? But he's best basically more and he does probably less damage than some of the other frontline folks that are above there. But he's very effective and but definitely like a little bit of a tier down from a frontline fighter and can do other things. Ranger is next. He's a D10 hit points. Um, he's someone who is kind of a mix between a druid and a fighter, right? In the sense of he's someone who's very nature based, right? Knows outdoors type fighter, can do a lot of things like some things like druids can, but is more fighter based. Some of the bow builds for ranger are just excellent, right? And as such, they can be a support character from distance, right? They can throw some spells to help support. They could be on the front lines if you build them as such, for sure. Um, but they are what they are, so they're kind of in that. That's why I kind of put them in that gray area. Druid and cleric, next two things, and again, I'm not going to try and read all these descriptions. They're all in the DM's guide. Um, both druid and clerics are D8 of hit points. Very solid support characters. Both have the ability to move towards the front lines if they need to be. Druid can change into different animal forms, so they can transform themselves into different animals, fight as that animal. When that animal form is quote unquote killed, they go back to their normal form with the hit points they had before, right? So as such, they can take quite a bit of damage. You know, um, in some ways they remind me of barbarians in the sense, and someone else pointed this out. It was a good parallel where you figure barbarians get a boatload of hit points, but their armor class tends to be not as high um, as say the fighters and the paladins, right? And as such, they can take a lot of damage between that and their rage form. The druid is similar, whereas you can change into different animals. The animals tend to have a lower armor class, so they'll take a decent bit of damage, and then they can take the next animal form. So in some sense, you could use a druid. You can think of some parallels between the way barbarians and druids work. But druids have spells that allows them to be support characters for sure, and they can survive in the front as well, so they can move up and down that list. Clerics, um, in some ways, the most support type of character out there, probably. Can buff the group in a lot of different ways, give them their hit points back, give them bonuses to hit, all that kind of good stuff. They also can move up this list in terms of frontline support, being in the front line, as they can have a high armor class, and with their healing spells, they can heal themselves, right? So it allows them to stay up there longer, right? But they are the ultimate support character in that sense, right? I don't know if anyone, well, I shouldn't say that. Some of the Bard stuff has some good support spells. Like I said, this is always kind of a fuzzy math, especially in 5e. But yeah, next step is Warlock, another D8. So this is another spellcaster. I've seen them play frontline. I've seen them play utility, kind of a mix, right? Um, they're an interesting character. They don't, uh, you know, I've seen a number of people play them to great effect, right? They can definitely do some fun stuff. Um, they're not my personal favorite character, but they can wield some magic, and they can provide a number of different roles depending how they're built, right? But I wouldn't classify them as quite as frontline or supporty, I don't know, as the people above, right? But not quite you as utility as some of the folks below. So they're kind of in that odd range. So I kind of put them in the middle there. Um, all right, so utility characters. So the rogue is one of the ones that are most popular and usually the most played as utility. They're rounding out that group. They can do quite a bit of damage. They can sneak in and out and do that damage, being a rogue, assassin, thief, that kind of thing. They can pick locks, they can hide and sneak around. They do a lot of things that don't necessarily directly support the group, like a druid or cleric, but round out the group again as abilities that other people don't have. Um, excuse me. So they kind of do that rounding there. Artificer. Now the next one, I'll be honest, I haven't played it. My son's played it once. I'll have to read it more, right? But they kind of remind me of bards in the sense that they can round out the group. They can invent things, invent magic items and stuff like that, which is kind of cool. Different for sure. It's definitely a class I have to look into, right? But I think they fit pretty or play more often. I really haven't played it. Um, but my impression and everything is that it's not really a support character in that same sense as druids and clerics. Um, but they do have a number of things that can help round out the group in a number of different ways. So I kind of threw them in here for now and in the use in the utilities, and yeah, they are what they are. Bard is another one that I'm actually playing a 5e Bard for the first time recently. Um, Definitely a more utility character. They can do some support stuff as well. Like I said, with this list, you can always build your character in such a way to move up and down this list a little bit. They have wiggle room, right? But they are magicians, oh, not magicians, yeah, right. Um, oh, did I actually spelled magician there? I gotta spell change that later. They are musicians that use music to inspire the group, give them buffs, as also round out the group, right? So maybe even Bard has to be above Artificer on this list. Just kind of bump them up a little bit as I sit here and think about it. Um, but yeah, they're in that mix of utility where they're rounding out and supporting. The last two are the cannons, right? So both of these classes have a d6 in hit points, so they get the fewest hit points, and as such, they get access to magic that other classes do not. That is seriously powerful, right? So, the sorcerer, you know, gets a lot of powerful magic, and some really interesting builds can come from that. Um, they're kind of a person that gets magic because of innate abilities within them for various reasons. Sometimes they can't even control the magic power within them. Um, you know, and some of the builds, it's kind of a neat class. Personally, I just rather play wizard, um, but there's a lot of people who really like them, and they have some very interesting tools there. Wizard is your Gandalf type folks, right? Extremely powerful magic, capable of doing just some crazy stuff on the battlefield. And in that sense, they're complicated to play because they have so many options. So, if you think of like a fighting unit, say an army unit or something like that, you have your folks on the front line. You have people who support those frontline troops and is probably doing some of the frontline fighting as well. You have people in the back that kind of round out that army, that fighting unit that does various things to help, round it out. Whether that's anything from logistics to what have you, right? Specialized units, that kind of thing. And then you have your artillery units in the back, right, who are just lobbing cannon shells at people, right? Um, if you think of it that way, each group has a role. Each group is important. Each group can kind of wiggle a little bit in different directions depending how you use them. And that's kind of how I try and think of it here. So I don't know if this helped. I mean, it's kind of a 20-minute ramble here, but wanted to give folks, like, if you're building a group, you kind of, if you want to have a well-rounded group, you'd probably want to try and pick someone who is in that red tier, somewhere in that yellowish tier, something in that green tier, something in that blue tier. Is that necessary? No. I mean, I've seen groups without a sorcerer or a wizard, or I've seen groups without a rogue or a bard or an artificer, so not necessarily, not always utility. They might be more of a, front heavy or what have you. But you just got to realize that there's going to be some holes in the what your group can or can't do. Not that they're going to get wiped out. Probably would have been true in 1E, they might get wiped out, but in 5E, not so much. But it's something to think about when you're building a group and what you'd like to do. And yeah, that's it. So it was just kind of fun, actually, just to kind of try and come up with a chart like this while I'm relaxing on a Saturday. Um, so yeah, have a good one, folks. Hope this was a little um, helpful. I don't know if I helped or not, as opposed to a giant train of thought, but hopefully it helped, and you can get some idea of what you're supposed to do as a different class, right? And like I've said about 5 times in this video, there's no reason in 5e that you can't take someone who's at a certain tier level and build them in such a way that they shift up and down a little bit on this chart. If you get into multi-classing, then you can make it however you want. But as a pure build within these groups, within these different roles, different classes, you can juggle up and down this chart as you see fit to couple slices in either direction, generally speaking. All right, folks, have a good one. Thanks. Bye.